The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello, and welcome to the Flourishing at TPE Onsite webinar. We're so excited to have you all join us today for this amazing information. My name is Ebonice Lamar, and I am the chair of the candidate development team for TPE. So before we get started, I'll just have to go through, I'm going to go through a couple of items that will help you all during this presentation today. And so one portion of our presentation today is the question phase. And so throughout this webinar, you'll have an opportunity to ask our presenters questions related to the content of the webinar. In order to do that, take a look at the bottom of your screen and you'll see a chat box, a question box. That is where you are able to type into your question so that all of our presenters can see them throughout the presentation. We will be going through your questions towards the end of the presentation. If we cannot get through any of your questions during the presentation, you are definitely welcome to email us at candidates@theplacementexchange.org, and we'll make sure we get your question answered. Also, another piece for the webinar in the presentation is that this webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel within 48 hours of this presentation, should you would like to view the content at a later time. And so at this time, I'd like to go ahead and turn over the webinar presentation to our presenters so that you all can enjoy the content.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. From my two other wonderful colleagues, thank you for joining us today. The PowerPoint is going to be, it should be shared with everyone's screen right now. If you have any specific questions, our personal contact information will also be part of the slides today, but I will go ahead and let you meet the other fabulous moderators on our session here today. So I believe we'd start with Chris.
Good afternoon. My name is Chris MacDonald. I serve as the Executive Director of University Housing at West Virginia University. I also served on the TPE committee for 4 years and chaired it in 2017. 2016? 17? I can't remember.
Hey, Chris, what are your pronouns?
Oh, my apologies. He, him, and his.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, y'all. My name's Amanda Ray Barbosa Barella. I also go by A Ray. I use the pronouns she, her, and hers. My apologies for not having them on the screen. Director for Residence Life for Bush Campus at Rutgers University, and I am excited to be a part of this. I was a volunteer as a NEF mentee at TPE in 2011, so I'm excited to be able to come back and contribute in other ways.
Hi, everyone. Like I said earlier, I am Tim Layson. I serve as the Assistant Director of Residential Life at our Arizona State University West Campus. My preferred pronouns are he, him, his, and there's my contact information. And I have been a candidate at TPE. I've served on many recruitment teams for TPE, and I wholeheartedly believe in the positive interview experience that TPE can provide, and really being able to give back to our profession in a different way is why I decided to join the panel here for today.
So a little bit about today and our goals and the agenda for our time together. So some of our overarching goals are that as candidates, you'll be more knowledgeable of the process and the general experience. But I think what is also really important to us is that you're provided information that can make you more conscious in the decisions and really provide that sense of both autonomy, but also build a community and connections with the panelists and other folks who are part of the TPE team. We'll be talking a little bit more about pre-TPE prep, so before you get to the space. Physically navigating the TPE space, it's pretty large and there's a lot going on. You know, when you get there and as you're preparing, day of interview prep, from there, we recognize that we're whole people. So taking care of yourself, taking care of others, and finding ways to advocate for that as you can. Lastly, we'll wrap up with some resources, final thoughts, and information on future TPE webinars.
So to start off with, I always think about going into any job interview phase. I look at it as a big homework assignment. So when I talk to other candidates or prospective folks that are looking at going to TPE, they always ask, how do I prepare? So I think first and foremost, if you're new to the world of higher ed, TPE, there's a lot of acronym soup within higher ed, stands for the Placement Exchange. And so it is a number of professional organizations within student affairs and higher education that come together with a Hawaii, in partnership with a Hawaii, to offer an interview placement time for employers and those looking to interview with different schools around the country. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop for everything that you're looking to do. And obviously not every school is represented there, but there's always a good amount of schools and a good diversity of positions that are always offered at TPE. So if you didn't know what it was, just to kind of give you a little bit of an overview, and if you don't know where it is, it's in Los Angeles this year. TPE usually coincides with the NASPA conference. It happens right before it, so just to kind of give you that, a little piece of information. Another great thing is really watch the webinars. I've watched a few of them from the years previous, just to kind of get an idea of the messages that other wonderful colleagues have shared with other folks. And I remember going through my first TPE search that these webinar series weren't as readily available, but being able to talk with others who have done it beforehand is always great. But now with the integration of technology, you can watch these webinar series. Part of the job search is being real and talking about finances, your personal finances. Job searching is expensive, so we recognize that while TPE is a great place to meet many prospective employers, that financially it is a big commitment. And so when you're doing your job search, whether you're going to TPE or not, you'll want to make sure that financially you plan things out for the next couple of months. Since depending on what your job search is looking like, there's going to be travel involved and incidental fees and hotel costs and all of those things that you have to consider. So I haven't gone through the process myself. That was one thing I did a few months before going to the actual TPE experience, was just look at my overall finances and make sure that I have everything set in a place where I feel comfortable that I can not only go to these experiences, but then afterwards travel to the different on-campuses that I would have been offered. Before leaving for TPE, you want to preset some interviews, potentially if you're able to. And so the 3 sub-bullet points I talk about there, when you're researching institutions, go beyond what is easily accessible on their websites. So depending if you're looking at a housing job, really looking at the institutional mission and vision of where they want to go, and then looking at the housing department's website to see what kind of buildings they offer, what types of family or types of living options are offered for every level of student. Doing your homework beforehand will save you so much time before you are able to actually sit down with the interviewers, because you want to make sure that even before you sit down with them that you believe and feel like that it's a place where you will be able to grow and succeed just by reading up on the information. Because I'll give you a great example. Arizona State, we are known for our charter. It is a 1-paragraph charter statement that encompasses the work that we do, and inherently every candidate that comes and interviews with Arizona State University brings up this charter and like what it means to them. And so it's good to know that not only have you understood what our university charter is, but also they bring in different aspects of what we do departmentally. So thinking about going beyond what is just easily accessible on a website, if you can find the student newspaper publication, because you can definitely see what the student pulse is and what is important to them. And then the next point that kind of goes into it is, looking at the department and the website, like link this job interview to whatever your next set of goals are for yourself. So if you're interested in doing career professional development and you are interviewing for a position at TPE, how does that institution, one, how do they help students understand career readiness and professional development, and two, how does potentially working for that department really align within your continued goals of either staying within career and professional development services or going into another functional area. And part of the TPE experience is you are able to build a profile of where you want to interview geographically and the types of schools, and so you will be bombarded with a ton of emails from so many schools. There's no obligation for you to take an interview with every school that interviews with you. So, for example, I had a graduate student many years ago when they went to TPE, they were geographically bound. So while it was great to, get interview invites from schools from around the nation, they were very specific in where they wanted to interview. And so you are able to interview where you want to interview with the schools that you want to interview with. And so I think that's really important. And as part of this process, that as an interviewer, that's the great part, is that other schools are reading your resume and your profile and see something in you that might be desirable for what they're looking for, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to interview with them. I think that's a very important point because you want to be satisfied in where you interview and who you interview with. At that point. And then my last point on doing your homework is mock interviews if you're able to. At NC State, we were able to have the chance to do a mock TPE experience with our department, and our professional staff at the time were amazing and being able to ask us questions and then debrief with us after the interview and say, so when you get this question, this is a great part of it, but here's where you might want to take that into a different direction. And if you're doing phone interviews before you get to TPE, practice a phone interview with someone. Phone interviews can be challenging if you are someone who likes to read the room of energy and see how people react or how they view your answers to your questions. And so practice, because TPE is one of those experiences that is really awesome. Overwhelming when you first walk in, and so making sure that you're practicing how you're answering certain questions and how you're navigating certain aspects of your interview will be very, very important. And that's just all about doing your homework beforehand. So researching the institution, thinking about the goals that you want to have for yourself, and then interviewing with where you want to interview, and just make sure you practice, because that's all a good part of doing your homework before you even get to the physical, before you even step out the door and on your way to TPE. So Amanda or Chris, do you all have anything that you want to add to this slide?
I think that you covered a really great portion. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, the only thing I would offer is kind of a snap agreement is I know a lot of folks might create some stress for themselves in whether or not they should or should not decline an interview request. Even if you're beyond your first interview and you decide that maybe it's not an institution you want to continue with, as long as you approach it with a professional declination and do so with some expediency and don't hang on to it too long, whereas the employer might be disappointed, they'll get over it very quickly. And they won't think any ill of you if you choose not to even begin with them, or even if you choose to withdraw from their process for whatever reason. So long as you communicate that so that they can start focusing on those candidates that are looking at them with a little bit more intent, they'll be fine with it, as well as you recognize that that's part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to talk a little bit about the space itself. So what I did is I included here just one kind of snapshot. This is actually from the San Antonio TPE experience. And for those of you who have not been to one before, I just wanted to kind of give you an idea of where you're going to spend a lot of your time. And this is just one shot, whereas there could be a couple of shots that ultimately identify all the different spaces within TPE. But this is the interview hall. And each one of those little squares represents a school interviewing for position or even multiple positions. And there could even be ancillary rooms that have additional setups depending on how many schools or jobs are registered for the conference. When you first walk in, undoubtedly it'll be a little overwhelming. It'll feel cavernous. I've never heard of anyone feeling claustrophobic, just quite the opposite. But TPE does a great job of creating smaller spaces so that you can have a little bit of intimacy, but a lot of folks first worry about, well, how can I interview next to someone who's interviewing 3 feet away? After about your second interview, you won't even notice the people interviewing next to you. So just be mindful of that space, and that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about today, the overall, the different spaces that are going to be available to you for your successful navigation of the placement exchange. First off, there are a lot of specific rooms and resources set for you as candidates. There's a candidate workroom, and outside of the main interview hall, this is where you will likely spend most of your time. It's a seating area. There's wireless printing, charging stations, any kind of office supply you could probably possibly think of, and then some of these things that you wish you'd brought that you didn't bring, like a Clorox pen because maybe you decided to have pasta or something with a sauce or something, and it got somewhere you don't want it to be visible anymore. Clorox pens, all different types of cleaning and hygiene products, mints. Mints are always very popular. And then the other things that are typically present there, unless they've been able to find some additional space, I'm not completely familiar with how they're able to set up in LA this spring, but there are coaching spaces there, and roundtable discussions that might take place there. And we'll talk about those a little bit later on as far as resources and a little bit more depth, but you're going to find all those in that workroom. You'll also find what usually can be described as almost a cohort experience in that space. After a while, if you even came with 1 or 2 people, you might end up seeing some of the same people, start conversations. It becomes a great place of comfort, camaraderie, shared experience. It's a very dynamic space, one where you can both feel productive and also where you can go and relax and just let your guard down just a little bit. But there's also a quiet workroom, so whereas the regular candidate workroom can at times be loud, the quiet workroom is specifically that. It's a quiet workroom. It's a space where the expectations of folks are able to go in there, take a moment for themselves, quietly read something. If you need that type of space in order to feel like you can focus, instead of maybe the larger space, the normally bigger candidate workroom, then that quiet workroom would be a good space and a good option for you. And then there are also candidate computer stations. Those are going to be workstations either in a specific room or also spread throughout different spaces depending on how they've been able to set up the space in LA. You might bring your laptop, but if you don't, this will definitely be a resource to you. But there'll be 10, 12 or more computers set up that allow you to access the placement exchange candidate environment online, do additional research, do whatever you need to do. Those will be available. They bathe the space in Wi-Fi, but after you include candidates, employers, and as well as staff and support environments, you're talking close to 1,500 people. And for all of us on campus, we know what a lot of people in a small space, ultimately a small space, can do when it comes to broadband strength. There's also a mail system. So this is a little bit analog, but at the same time, it's part of the experience. It's an on-site mail system that actually provides you with your own box. You have a candidate, you are a candidate, there is a specific mailbox that is associated with you, and your prospective employers will communicate with each other, not only online, but also physically through that mail system. That mail system allows the TPE team to help you manage your schedule, as well as allow for some potential physical communication that you want to have with the employer that they might want to have with you. There'll be times when you actually go to your mailbox, it'll be empty. Never fret. Sooner or later, there will be something in there. There might also be times where you're going to go to your mailbox and it'll be chock full, and you're wondering, oh my gosh, what am I supposed to do with this? A lot of times, employers will drop off position announcements, additional material. If you progress through a process, there might be additional materials they want you to review in preparation for that interview. So there's an opportunity for you to sit down and become a little bit better prepared, and that'll all be done through that mail system. It's typically very close in proximity to either the candidate workroom or the interview space, again, depending on the schematics of the space that they've been able to create, so that you can try to usually get between one or two of those spaces with usually less than a minute walk. And the other part that we want to make sure that we kind of communicate a little bit is you're going to be a lot of social media, and as the different apps and the different opportunities to engage continue to grow, we want to be a little bit mindful of folks that, yes, especially in the candidate workroom where people are going to be very social, there might be an opportunity to utilize a lot of those social media environments online. Just try to be mindful of those around you. May not be as keen on being involved in your social media experience. You don't have to worry about it too much, but just be mindful about what you do, and I would definitively avoid doing anything with social media in the interview hall itself. That's a professional space, and not to denote that social media is not professional, but at the same time it's a little bit more straightforward as far as allowing people to get into the right mindset in order to go and engage in the interviews that they want to take care of and be successful with. And again, the map that I show you there is just of the interview hall. When you arrive to TPE, you'll be actually given an opportunity to take a tour of all these spaces. You'll be able to see it's very well marked. I hate to imagine someone necessarily getting lost because there are arrows and signage everywhere, let alone a really fantastic TPE staff that are ready and willing to help you with pretty much anything you need. If they're at the end of your experience for some reason there wasn't something available to you in the candidate workroom, make sure you communicate that on your evaluation. It would have nice to have been to have this. It would have liked to have had it this way. Have you considered this different type of space for different type of candidate that might have different styles and needs? Just really utilize that evaluation because they've been able to continue to update and improve this program based off that feedback, specifically from candidates, because we want you to be as successful as possible. A-Ray, anything to add to that, or maybe Tim?
No. Thanks.
I think those were all great points.
Yeah. So as we continue to talk about more spaces, navigating spaces, the TPE spaces, some additional spaces where there'll be lots of engagement, and as you're preparing for interviews is first the waiting area. So as you go to enter the TPE complex, so to say, there'll be a specific area where schools will come to pick you up, call your name, or whichever is the best way to identify you, to say, hey, we're ready to come interview you. So there's seating areas that are typically organized by the first letter of your last name. And there's typically, I think, 4 or so different areas, but there'll be, once again, clear signage as well as great staff and volunteers around to show you where that is. So if I was coming to interview, or as I've done as an interview, I'll come into that space. If somebody's last name is Barbosa, I'll go to B and say, hey, Rutgers University is here and we're ready to interview Amanda Ray Barbosa. So I typically have a sign that has a big Rutgers flare on it, maybe some Scarlet Night fun, and then that way, that could be one way in which you as a candidate can identify that person, and then they can identify you. You're going to be there with other people, probably typically people that you have similar last names, so eventually you can almost build a camaraderie with some folks, even if you didn't know them before that moment. And you'll be waiting and kind of maybe chatting, kicking with them, or maybe you're just doing your own thing, waiting, going through your notes, preparing for that interview space. You don't need to sit in there the entire time. Typically, I think most people go there about 5 or 10 minutes before their interview time is coming up. There you go. And then at the end of your interview, the person will drop you off back in this waiting area and you'll exit from there. Sometimes they'll just excuse you from the table itself. So they'll pick you up from the waiting area and then they'll walk you over to where their table is for interviewing. There's multiple types of setups for this. So some might be in like a larger room where their table is set up to another table next to them. There are some tables that are maybe a little bit more private. Some institutions might get a bit more of a private area that's almost tented. But they'll walk you to show you where it is exactly that they're going to be seated. One of the things that I would encourage you to do, if you can, just based on certain areas, is to try your best to lean in and speak up so you're able to be heard. Also, if you're a loud talker, I always like to say I'm a loud introvert. I'm pretty my voice carries is that how do I be mindful that the person who's interviewing me or that I'm interviewing can hear me, but I'm mindful of the space around me. So a sense of spatial awareness, so I'm not interrupting other interviews too, to the best of my ability. And if you laugh or tell a joke, I mean, live your life. It's okay. It's in light, but just a general consciousness and awareness is important. In between interviews, after interviews, in the evenings, there's different types of socials and informal spaces and interactions that you might have with other candidates as well, but especially with people or schools that you're interviewing with, employers, potential employers, right? Not every school does a social, and there's many reasons for that. So that might include that, for example, when I was at another institution, I was party of one, and so that was a lot of space. So I would find ways to interact and connect with candidates of interest in other aspects, in other ways socially throughout the TPE area. But there are many schools or maybe even regions that will host TPE socials. If you go, it's up to you whether you want to go or not. And some suggestions as you navigate that space is look for the person that you interviewed with. For me, as somebody, that's a great point of connection, and even to say, hey, it was great to meet you. Who are some of the other folks from your institution that are here? I'd love to meet them, or I'd like to meet them. Whatever is going to be natural to who you are, right? And there are times too where I'm just going to interact and connect with that one person, and that is okay too. You have to kind of take note of where you're at. And the socials will happen once again, typically later in the evening. But that's not to say that you're not going to see folks perhaps at the local coffee shop where you're going to get lunch, waving, saying hello, if it's an appropriate time to check in, or not so much about your candidacy, but more so just in a social aspect, that's okay too. Things that are important to note, that there are times where people might invite you to offsite socials that aren't through TPE specifically. So it might be at a local restaurant, a bar. That is, once again, up to you how you choose to attend, not attend. One of the things that we were talking about as organizers is just using reflecting upon how do you want to best represent yourself in all spaces, whether you're in a specific interview or you're in a social space. The truth is that at all times we're interviewing. And so whether it's you choose to, particularly if you choose to drink alcohol, how are you just being mindful of consumption? And likewise, employers should be doing that as well. And being mindful of how we're making sure that as candidates, you're set up for success no matter what space you're in, and you'll also have the opportunity to show up as well. All right, one of the last things that we wanted to give nod to that we think is really important is not accepting interviews outside of the TPE space. The TPE space, I'm making that into a word rather than an acronym, sorry, is really set up with the guidelines with your care, your safety in mind. And that includes having it within mostly working hours, because we recognize that going into the late hours, it's hard to, one, as an employer, be a great host, and as well as an interviewee, or candidate rather, showing up when you've been interacting throughout the day. So break time is really important for you. I think another piece that is to be mindful is that we cannot make promises of what is shared in, non-sanctioned or non-TPE spaces. If you have a set up at a coffee shop or other things, there's just a lot of what ifs that can happen. And so we encourage and really ask folks, the same way that we're asking employers, is to keep the official interviewing within the TPE space for your own wellness and safety, and also your own boundaries, as well as what we would ask for employers. Something that's important to mention, the great thing that I appreciate about TPE is that we have to have our name tags as we access spaces, and so that's just to ensure that the space is really focused on interviewers and candidates and people that are supposed to be in those spaces are in those spaces. So if you lose your name tag, go ahead to the check-in and get a new name tag printed, but just to be sure that you have it with you at all times as you're going to different spaces. There'll be people at the doors that are just going to look to make sure, usually security in the building, just to make sure that you have that name tag in the as you're entering and exiting spaces. Anything else that other Tim and Chris you'd like to add?
No, ma'am.
No, that was great, Amanda. So as you think about, the actual interview process, so what we've designed our presentation to be is kind of give you that 10,000-foot-ish view. So now we're starting to funnel in of, we talked about the physical space, we talked a little bit about the interview approaches, now that the interviews are actually coming. And so I try to put some funny memes on here, and if some folks don't like them, I'm sorry. But the question I always get asked is, what should I expect on the day of interviews? And I say all of the things, because you really don't know what's going to happen every day. But the way I've tried to build this particular slide is the way that, like, chronologically, what I would do in my mind, what I have done as a candidate. So I always like to be on time, so I always got there about a half an hour early to the actual location of where the interviews are taking place. Go to the candidate workroom. I found a space. Luckily, when I was interviewing, I was with a group of folks, and so we all just kind of made friends and put our stuff in the candidate workroom. And also, there is security. There's security outside and inside the candidate workroom, so you can feel free to, like, leave your purses and bags and all of that, and don't feel like you have to bring everything with you to every single interview. Also recognize that on interview days, every school is a little bit different. Some schools do a first round or pre-screening phone interview and then an in-person round and then maybe a second round. So making sure you're asking those questions and making sure that, again, doing your homework, that you've gotten all the information that you need. So if that's information sheets that you've created for yourself, or what I always like to do is just create a fast bullet that had all the institutions that I interviewed with about 6 to 7 fast facts that I could look over while I was waiting in the candidate area before my interview. I always reviewed my resume before going into an interview, just to make sure, like, I hit on certain points depending on the job and position I was interviewing for. I wanted to make sure I highlighted certain things outside of my resume, or within my resume, obviously, and making sure that I knew what my resume was about. I had an institution one time that tested me on my resume a little bit, and they said, if you had to pick one thing in 20 seconds that you were most proud of on your resume, what would it be? And I obviously answered the question great, but it's only because I knew and reviewed my resume beforehand. Also, if you preset schedule or preset interviews, make sure you know your schedule. So if you preset interviews, you can look it up on the TPE website under your specific candidate profile. But if you add interviews, make sure you update your schedule. So whether you print it out or you put it in your phone, just make sure you review your schedule. Just so that way you know what you're getting yourself into for the day, and you know how many interviews you have. And then obviously, after you've done the things on before that, go to your interview. I try to get to the candidate waiting areas when I was a candidate about 5 to 10 minutes early, just so that way I knew I was in a place, and then I would get into what's called the TIM zone, just like getting my mind right, getting myself right, doing some breathing exercises. So I always tried to make sure that I stayed a few minutes ahead of all of my interviews. And part of your day as a candidate is also making sure that you're scheduling interview breaks. And the most important part, make sure you eat. I think sometimes that candidates and even employers forget that, oh wait, we need to eat, and don't necessarily have to schedule interviews through lunch. I mean, as an employer, it looks a little bit different because we can rotate through people on our team, but as a candidate, it's very important that you're scheduling breaks within your schedule. So one of the great suggestions that, as Ray, Chris, and I were talking, was Chris told us that if you are doing a 30-minute interview, it's probably not a bad idea to do a 30-minute break before your next interview. And especially for some schools, they may only do, for Arizona State, I'll give you this perspective, we only do one 45-minute interview, and we don't offer second-round interviews at TPE. So being able to know, like, what their interview structure is like as you're corresponding with these folks prior to getting to TPE is very important, because then if you're trying to schedule interviews after another interview, you know what the time interview intervals have to be, excuse me. And I think the biggest thing when it comes to interviewing is that you are the expert on your own experiences. This is a time for you to kind of showcase the things that you've learned either in your graduate school or in another position, or lessons that you've learned in the field if you've been in the field for a few years. Like, you are the expert on your own experience. And when you go into that space, I would talk to folks about, don't just breathe and get your breath under control, but breathe in confidence, because you have gotten to this point where you are looking for a position at a different university, whether it's geographically or nationally. This is your time to really just talk about you and talk about the amazingness that is your being. And so when you're in an interview, always remember that you are the expert on your own experiences, because that's what we want to hear in an interview is how is the experiences that you've had shaped your identity as a professional and as a person and all of those great things. So when we think about, I'm sorry, Amanda or A-Ray or Chris, did you all have anything to add on this slide?
No, sir.
So when we think about interviewing expectations, it's a great, interviewing for any position is a great feeling, but it can cause a little nervousness, and that's okay. And obviously what you should be ready for is anything. So when we think about, and these are some of the expectations I talk about with my team and some of the folks that I've mentored through this process, is that keep focused on your interviewers, like A-Ray and Chris said, in the physical spaces of the physical space. It can be a little distracting with other people around you, so sometimes you do have to lean in and hear the questions, and make sure you're making that eye contact with the person. Also, take your time, even though 30 minutes may not seem like a very long time, it is. Be concise, but answer the questions. And this is something big for me. If you don't understand a question, ask for clarification, because sometimes you may not have heard the person that was asking the question, or maybe you literally don't understand the question. And that's something I always say to candidates before they sit down with us is, if you feel like you don't understand a question or you need us to clarify it for you, please do that. We'd rather that you understand the question than answer it incorrectly, so that way we can make sure we're getting to know you as best as we can. Have questions ready for your interviewers. I think sometimes this is missed. So making sure that you have some questions ready, even if it's the same 3 questions that you're asking every institution that you sit down with. I think, have some questions that you're ready to ask your interviewers, because not only do we want to engage with you as we, as employers, ask you questions as interviewers, but we want to see the types of questions that you're going to ask us to see, what do you know about our institution so far? What do you want to know about our institution, and things like that. Keep your resume handy just in case. I know that before I left, on the flight to TPE when I was interviewing, I had 5 or 6 copies of my resume just in case an institution didn't have it on hand, so I could give it to them. And you can obviously print some in the candidate workroom, which is great. And then the last thing is just show us you. We as much as we're interviewing you, you're interviewing us, and so we want to get to know you, and we want to know what you have to offer to our institution, and we want to know what we can offer to you as an institution itself. Looking at the experiences and all of that kind of stuff, but we want to see, excuse me, we want to get to know you. There are just some of those canned answers that we can get from time to time, and I really focus on with folks is just saying, I want to know about you and why you want to be in this position. We know why, we know how you want to be here and where you're at, but I want to know the why, and getting that genuine and authentic answer. And again, it just goes back to remembering that you are the expert on your own experiences. We want to see all the things that you bring to the table and how we can help you develop as a professional. A-Ray or Chris, do you have any other thoughts?
The only thing I was going to offer in addition was to, again, stress about your preparation of questions and having some on hand. If you can even make them institutional specific, that's great, especially if you are concise and you don't expect to spin that yarn while you're responding to the questions that are posed to you. It also affords the institution the opportunity to do two things, which is see that you've investigated and spent some time investigating them, shows that you have a significant level of interest. And then number two, it allows you to hear from them in a space that they're looking to talk about themselves. They're hearing about other people all the time. I can't tell you how often you want to speak after interviewing people for a significant period of time. You want to have the opportunity to maybe engage. Instead of just listen, you also want to be able to listen intently and then also share with the candidates. So if you can make them detail-oriented and possibly even compound sentences, and compound questions that allow them to dig a little bit deeper. And to be honest with you, sometimes for me, questions were always a great way to make sure that if I ended up shorting an answer and I knew it later, then I could actually go back to an answer that I wasn't happy with and frame it as a question to show that I maybe have rethought it or maybe for whatever reason, because they expect us to have little brain blips as candidates, and so that provides you an opportunity to show that you can also think on your feet and be able to engage in and have that conversation with them.
Good.
I think that as you're preparing for interviews, it's never bad to have some, if you know you have certain values or expectations that you would hope for the work environment or the space that you want to be, it's okay to have some stock questions. With that said, I would say personalize it with context. So for me, I'm really relational. Small institution, I worked at a large institution. So a way that I might want to frame this is, you know, I'm a very relational person. I noticed that you have a staff of 5. Talk to me about how people use, build, and then also utilize their relationships in the work environment, or just generally speaking. Or at Rutgers, I might say, I see that you have a staff of, you know, 20 plus folks. Relationships are really important to me. Talk to me more about X, Y, and Z. So I think that, you know, if you know those are your values and really important to you and it doesn't come up in the interview, if you are somebody who's like, I want to prepare before, you can do that. Just find ways to personalize it to where that place and space is.
Great. So, I think this is my last slide for a few, but some schools offer second and third round interviews, which is great. And so you'll just want to make sure, like, asking what that process looks like moving forward in an interview. And sometimes in a second and third round interview, like what you're looking to expect, make sure you have enough time in your schedule. Making sure that you're leaving some blocks of time if the school wants to do a second or third round interview with you. The focus of the interview is that we're still getting to know you. So you may be, like I said at a different point, you may be interviewing with a potential supervisor, another set of colleagues, or a potential senior level person, depending on the team that it's made up of. I know for Arizona State University, our senior director is actually part of our interview process, and so he will sit in on interviews with folks. And so if you're given a second or third round, you might be asked the same questions, but it could be with just a different set of people. And so just making sure that you've taken the time, again, to get to know the institution and all of that. And so, like I said, you might be asked the same set of questions, but with just a different person. And that the focus is still getting to know you as a candidate. And like A-Ray said in an earlier slide, that these interviews should always be in the interview area and nowhere else. I think that's really important. And I also think that as you're going through the interview experiences, you're going to have some really great ones where you connect with the folks, and then you may have some ones where you may take a second to go back and, you know, wonder how well that might have gone, or you just may not have a great interview experience. And so if you feel like after the interview you don't feel like it's going to be a great fit for you, either based on the questions or the vibe that you might be getting from the people, I think it's okay to withdraw yourself from their process, because obviously You may not want to waste their time, and they want to make sure that like they're getting the best candidate for their positions. And so, having myself walked away from the middle of an interview while I was at TPE, like it's for me, it was very empowering to do that. Just because I just knew at the end of the day I wasn't going to be a great fit for them. So I paused the interview halfway through and I said, at this point I'm going to withdraw my candidacy because I don't feel like this is a good fit. And so if you want to ask me more about that, you can. But I know that sometimes we have great interview experiences and sometimes we not so great interview experiences, and that it's always remembering that you are the expert on your own experiences. And so just always remembering that is very important in any interview setting, where it's the first round, second, or third round. Chris or A-Ray, do you all have anything else?
I think that was great. Thanks.
No, sir. Thank you.
So, I think a part of our work in student affairs and higher education, and what I hope is around creating spaces for ourselves, but then also for our communities that revolve around and involve love and advocacy and equity. And so during this next slide, I'll talk a little bit about ways to do that for yourself, but then how do we show up for others, especially if we're going with groups. And so I'll start with my slide by sharing this quote from Brene Brown that says, "Worthy now, not if, not when. We are worthy of love and belonging now, right this moment as is." And I think that that's really important. I think particularly for me, the TPE experience and just generally interviewing, I'm a first-gen Latina college student, and so it was intimidating. And so trying to lean into, one, having a job was important and real, both to fulfill my dreams, but then also in many senses to pay my bills. So that those are both real. And so I hope to shed a little bit of light of some of my experiences, and Tim and Chris can share as well. So first, one of the things that I'd encourage is, this is some part of some TPE prep, is just developing, taking stock, thinking about what your support team looks like, whether you call that your squad, your advisor team, your primos, like whatever that looks like, right? And so whether that might be your advisor, your actual advisor, it might look like mentors, perhaps your family is going to be there, maybe not, friends, colleagues. So just thinking about what that's going to look like, and starting to share a little bit of that experience with you. I know, for example, with my parents, they are really supportive in the ways they can, and so trying to describe that. I also had to describe to them that I won't be as accessible, we talk every day, as maybe they like me to be, but to, instead what my mom would do is she would send me text messages of encouragement. And so that was one way that was beautiful, that she could be a part of my experience in a way that was, that she was able to. And then also we had, she was able to support me. Also had some mentors and advisors that we were texting each other. Some I set up phone calls throughout the experience too, to just help me process, decompress. And some of that was just processing some of my answers, how I was feeling, if there was an experience or something that I thought was really valuable of who I was that I wanted to be sure to get through. As much as I did prepping before, to have those people who were able to be there was really helpful. Some folks might be at TPE, some people might be long distance. And so there were times where I would set up meals with people for lunch or for dinner, happy hour, whichever that looks like, to make sure that I'm building time to connect with people that I've built those relationships with, that I know are going to fill into my cup, and hopefully I could do the same for them. And similar with long distance too, what are the ways that I'm able to do that? For some folks, that might just look more like, having time to process, write, etc. I think that that's really important. So developing, taking stock of your team, and being intentional of how you're leaning on them and asking them, how they could support you, or sometimes it's showing them how they could do that. You might come to TPE perhaps with a group. Some people might get their own rooms or space, but I recognize that there's many others, including myself, when I went to through my search processes, that I had a room with, personally had a room with 4 other people, so it was pretty tight. And so we created some guidelines and boundaries, and some of that was like, there's this time where it's like, we're not allowed to talk about the job search. And that might work for you. And there are other times where when I go into those spaces, it's like, let me tell you about what happened. And some of that is just processing and being able to release. And some, I would say that talking about guidelines and boundaries really helps develop space where you can affirm each other, hopefully find ways to minimize comparisons or competition. I think that, you know, we live in I would say a competitive world, and I think that in society in many senses. And so for me, in sharing this, I hope that we could break that down in ways that we can let people show up as their best selves, and recognizing that our best selves looks different. Our experiences through interviewing is going to look different because we have multiple identities. We're interacting with a world that has different equities and inequities, and so finding space that even if an experience is different than yours, how do you affirm folks? How do you celebrate their successes, and how do you help them find resources, including if you need to talk to a TPE volunteer or somebody else, if you want to process your experience a little bit more, so feedback can be given to an employer or somebody else. I think that's really important. So creating guidelines and boundaries of how you want to process that if you're going with the team, sharing living spaces, I think that's important to talk about beforehand. And then also for your own reflection beforehand is thinking about how are you going to show up and support if you do go with the team, with some good boundaries, and how do you affirm each other, and then also preparing yourself that somebody else might have a different experience, and so how can you show up for them. Carving out you time, whatever that might look like. For some people, that might be going for a run. It might be getting on social media. It perhaps can be, you know, listening to a new album, song, reading a book, finding time and space where you can recharge, and be feeling more whole and vulnerable to yourself and with yourself moments, and to be able to process that. So whatever that you time would look like. Lastly, we talked about managing your schedule, sticking to interviews within, sticking to interviews within that time space. So for example, you know, if interviews are supposed to be from 9 to 5, sticking to that. If an employer asks you to come outside of that space, you know, it's like, hey, is that a social? Can you describe that a little bit more? Or if you know, I'm not going to be my best at 8 o'clock at night, so could we connect another time? I think that's a great way to redirect, but still advocating for yourself, your wellness. And likewise, as I said before, TPE will be encouraging and providing that direction to employers too. Space time for eating, breathing, connecting with others, and build breaks within your schedule too. I've been that person who's had back-to-back interviews, and I've come out of an interview being like, I don't remember what I've said. And so recognizing that, having to learn from that, and really thinking about the importance of even 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes really makes a difference. And even as you're building your schedule, you know, you are the navigator of your journey, but recognizing, is it that you're taking 10 to 15 interviews? Do you need 30 interviews? Once again, being conscious of what is your end goal, and knowing that you're worthy of interviews, you're worthy of the position, and to have a positive experience. So once again, self-love, advocacy, and also caring for those around you, I think is really important to having a fulfilling TPE experience. And each and everybody's experience on the panel, as well as those participating in this, is going to be different because of who we are and our identities. And I want to validate that, that is your truth, and that is important to lean into and to be heard. Thank you. Anything else, Tim and Chris?
Not for me.
No, ma'am. When you're there are going to be times where you might need either a recharge, a refocus, and you're going to be looking to get some assistance. And so there's quite a few resources available there that we want to make sure that we highlight, that you can attempt to take advantage of. It's built for your success. TPE is built that way. It is meant for the employers to be successful in finding good candidates, for candidates finding the right positions. And so there are a number of different exercises that you can take on while you're there that can help kind of make you, help you feel centered and as well prepared each day and even throughout your time there. First is the boot camp experience. It's a very popular experience. There are limited spaces for it. So if it's something that you're able to attend, I highly recommend it. There's a number of different sessions throughout the boot camp experience. It typically takes place the day prior to interviews beginning, and that again will be the case if you look at your schedule for TPE LA. The sessions go, you'll do some mock interviewing. It'll talk about different ways to engage with employers. Lots of really well set up sessions by other experts, employers, experienced candidates to help those that either want just that extra little cherry on top, or for those folks who are still feeling a bit nervous about the experience. During the TPE, the days during TPE, you'll also be provided a schedule of different roundtables that'll take place throughout the experience, and they could be on a varying number of different topics, including public versus private. Do I fit better with a public or a private institution? They'll have people there that'll talk to you about that. Maybe you're exercising a dual search with a partner, and you want to make sure that you have a good idea of how to best frame that. There'll be one that's definitely offered just for getting ready for that second interview. So what do you do now? You already got through the door. How do you make sure you get all the way in? And then maybe even whether it's seeking accommodations, whether there or on campus, when you maybe go for a campus visit, there'll also probably be a webinar towards the end that maybe even offers an opportunity to explore preparing for a campus visit. But similar to webinars, these are on site and in person. So I really like them because it does afford an opportunity. And plus, it lets you get out of the interview space for an hour or so and just commiserate and communicate about something specific that you might want to make sure you take some time with. And then the thing I recommend the absolute most is coaching. Throughout the time there will be opportunities for you to go to the candidate workroom and sign up to do coaching sessions. And these coaching sessions are with people from 5 years out who are candidates to people who are vice presidents and others at other institutions that have navigated the space. You might have specific questions. You might want to just kind of reaffirm your approach. You might have something that's kind of nagging you. Whatever that might be, they're there and they are wanting to commit and meet with you on the half hour or even more. And it's also a great opportunity just to meet some additional people and probably more than anything else affirm a lot of the prep that you've already done and to make you feel a little bit more confident, as Tim's been saying the entire time about your own experience and how you're trying to communicate it. But I cannot encourage that enough. But also be mindful, those can fill up quickly. So make sure that if that's something that you might want to do, even prepare yourself for, just go to the candidate workroom and sign up for that. And then again, just stressing, utilizing those workrooms. Take time. Those spaces are designed for you. They're built for you for whatever you might need them. The staff, the TPE team that is there are the most helpful and wanting for you to be successful. So if there are things that you need, you just need to ask, and they're going to do whatever they can for information about TPE, what to do next. And these are usually others that have experienced TPE on one side of the table or both, and are also just excited that you're there and want you to be successful. So TPE resources, there's tons of them. Make sure you use them. They are built for you and designed for you to be successful while you're there. So again, and if I could stress too, I would go boot camp and coaching. And coaching's far away the number one. Sorry I talked quickly, but I know we're getting close to end of time. There was one question that was asked so far. Someone had referenced homework, and I think Tim had done that. And will there be other webinars about specific things at TPE, or are they all general information sessions such as this one? I think the answer to that is yes to both. There are some more general, and then if you look at the schedule and the calendar of offered webinars prior to TPE, some of them will dig down a little bit more specificity. At the same time, all you need to do, if you have a specific question, you can email either Tim, myself, or A-Ray, or as we continue to progress through this in different webinars, or even email TPE themselves. The team that are responsible for candidate development, they will answer those questions as well. So if there's any question that you have, just ask it before or during, and we'll make sure that you get an answer of some kind or put you in the right direction.
So we are right at the end of our time together, and so I wanted to see if either A-Ray or Chris if y'all had any other final thoughts.
I just want to say thank you for your time. Remember, as the slide says, you're the expert in your own experiences, but that also that you can have, if you'd like, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to be a resource, and I'm sure my colleagues are. You can have a community while you go through this.
What I would offer is, if at all possible, mock interview as much as you can. No matter how confident you might feel in your content, how you deliver that content so it is easily digestible and rings true with those whom you're speaking with might take some crafting, especially if this type of engagement is not in your primary comfort zone. So if you're a small institution that doesn't necessarily have a huge apparatus set up around it to help provide a mock experience, seek them out, go through some different experiences to help create that. And but if those are offered through your different programs or through colleagues, definitely do it. And if you can do it with multiple people to get different levels of feedback so that you can feel confident in your preparation, do so. Mock interview, mock interview, mock interview.
And I would just echo my other two wonderful colleagues and what they've shared with you all. And I go back to like just making sure you're doing your homework, being prepared as you can, and then like my other two wonderful colleagues said, like if you need anything, our contact information is listed right there. But again, thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully what we shared with you is a pretty good overview of what TPE looks like and what an interview experience is going to look like for you. But if you have specific questions, feel free to reach out to one or all three of us or a TPE candidate development team. So other than that, thank you all again so much for taking this time with us. We hope that you have a wonderful day, and the best of luck to everyone that will be going to TPE, or just in general, best of luck with the interview season. It has come upon us, and it's a great experience. So best of luck to everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Best of luck.
Thank you. Take care.